Welcome to the first installment of Stanley Cupdate for April 21st, 2025. Vic Morren playing solo today with Neil traveling from New Jersey down to South Carolina, but we have spoken, and I'll throw in a little bit of his commentary as we go along here. So, Winnipeg, Colorado, Carolina, Toronto, and Vegas all quickly out of the gate with 1-0 series leads. Let's start right at the head with the Saturday games, with the Jets beating the Blues 5-3. And in this game, I thought St. Louis had this game exactly where they wanted it through two periods. They had good pressure, their discipline was good, and in fact, I thought the Jets appeared a little bit tight. But this is one that the Blues are going to regret having let get away, because if you're an underdog, you've got a legitimate shot to take the first game of a series and you don't get it. Historically, underdogs do not come back. So we'll have to see with the Blues for this one. But in the third period, as I said, Blues had this game in control, but they only generate two shots in the final 20 minutes. And at that point, the Jets' top line really dictated things in that third period. With Gabe Vilardi out, Alex Iafallo has fit right in alongside Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor. And that line combined for 7 points in the game. And even though Connor Hellebuck was not playing what we would call Vezina Trophy winning hockey, his stop on Jordan Kyrou in the second, when the Jets were down 3-2, was the key turning point in that game and an absolute crucial save at that point. Game 2 of that series will be played Monday night in Winnipeg. Colorado and Dallas, the Avalanche with a 5-1 win Saturday over the Stars. Dallas now 0-6-2. Going back to the end of the regular season, and they are chasing the Avs in this series. Despite two bad breaks on the first two Avalanche goals, one which was an awkward kick-in by Artturi Lehkonen, which I think if you watch hockey another 500 years, you may not see another goal like that one. And then Nathan McKinnon's goal was deflected and kind of plopped in behind Jake Ottinger in the Dallas net. I didn't think the Stars' energy level was nearly as high as it needed to be, even though they actually almost erased a 2-0 lead in the third period for the Avs. They weren't good enough, in my opinion, and I'm getting a sense already that Dallas knows that they have gotten themselves into a space that they may not be able to escape. They're going to have to be better. They're going to have to push harder, and they're going to really have to be able to overcome the injuries to both Jason Robertson and Miro Heiskanen. For the Avalanche, Nathan McKinnon, 2 goals and an assist, most visible player on the ice once again. And in discussion with Neil, he had raised the point of when you've got Cale Makar and you've got McKinnon going full bore, and Makar in that game actually could have made the score a whole lot worse than 5-1 because he had 10 attempts at the net during the course of the game and managed to only hit the net on one of them. So expect him to be more on target in game 2. Going back to discussion that I'd had with Neil, he was talking about Peter DeBoer's comment about Dallas being as strong as they have been over the last 7 or 8 games. And if that is the best effort that they have, they're in big trouble. One injury note in this game, Ross Colton left the game in the third period for the Avalanche with a lower body injury. Let's go to the games on Sunday now. The Carolina Hurricanes defeating the New Jersey Devils 4-1. Based on the 2-3 standings of these two clubs, this matchup has actually been in place going all the way back to January 20th. And Carolina came out just as advertised, throwing everything in New Jersey. You could tell that the Devils were having trouble with the speed. They were having trouble with the forecheck. And it showed in the stats at the end of the game, with Carolina holding a 45-24 shot edge and a 79-59 advantage in total attempts. Logan Stankhoven had a pair of goals for the Hurricanes in this game. And I think one of the big pieces here is that if the Devils can't forecheck, if they're not fast enough to do that, then they can't be heavy and they can't put the body on the Canes to slow them down. And this is what we saw pretty obvious throughout, particularly the first two periods of this game. And this is an adjustment that, as Neil and I had spoken about earlier, Sheldon Keefe is going to have to try to make with his club if they're going to be competitive in this series. Jacob Markstrom played relatively well. Can't fault him really on any of the goals. And let's look at the other end of the ice. Freddie Anderson, generally solid, and we have made note of him numerous times, whether or not he's going to be able to have a spring like he's never had before in the postseason, going back to his days in Toronto. He had 11 saves in the third period, and his biggest one came off of Timo Meier when the score was 3-1, and the Devils were really starting to make a little bit of a push after Carolina may have taken their foot off the gas a little bit. Also of note here, injuries starting to play a factor for the Devils already. Brendan Dillon left the game in the second period after getting tangled up with Jordan Martinook and did not return. Same can be said for Cody Glass, who was the victim of an inadvertent slash from his own goalie, Jacob Markstrom. He did not come back either. So those are two guys that we're going to have to look out for when these two clubs play in Game 2 on Tuesday. Luke Hughes also left this game in the third period, looking to be favoring his shoulder. Nonetheless, he did return. But if Dillon is unable to come back for Game 2, it appears that Simon Nemec would be next up. Toronto beats Ottawa 6-2, and what I thought was interesting in this game was, even though the Maple Leafs were outshot 13-5 in the first period, I believe that they really initiated the physical play more than Ottawa did. And this, of course, complements the already terrific skill level that that team already has. Thought that they were able to expose the Senators through center ice. They were able to hit on some seam passes. And so the combination of the unexpected physicality with the expected skill level was very problematic for Ottawa in this game. Both teams played this one pretty clean in the first period. 39 combined hits, but you can see that the elbows were down, the sticks were down. Weren't a lot of extracurriculars that were taking place after whistles. And this was a game for the Senators that, even though they were down 2-1 after the first period, they were right there. They were competitive. And then they got stupid. They took 4 penalties in the second period, 6 overall. And the Maple Leafs scored 3 power play goals, all by virtue of face-off wins, taking all of 9 seconds, 3 seconds after they had gotten a 2-man advantage, and 8 seconds. So already you can see that this power play for Toronto is going to be decisive. And if Ottawa's discipline does not start kicking in, this could be a very short series. I don't expect it to be so. Both Neil and I agree Ottawa will bring a more disciplined game to Game 2 and will probably use that as their blueprint for the rest of the series. But as Neil had told me, this is a game that you just want to take and put in the trash bin, particularly the last 40 minutes of the game. Of note here, the core 4 for the Maple Leafs: Auston Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, and John Tavares combined for 9 points in this game, and 7 other Maple Leafs got on the score sheet. So a night of terrific balance for them. And Anthony Stolarz, in his first playoff start, proving that the Leafs may indeed, for the first time in many, many years, have the goaltending requisite to make a run deep into the playoffs. So once again, solid all-around effort. The Leafs did not get pulled into the nonsense late in the game where the Senators were looking to get a scrum going in every stoppage. And I will say this in deference for the Senators: a couple of the calls in the second period, a little bit on the soft side, particularly on the one that Auston Matthews went down when he was hit by Adam Gaudette. That second game will be coming up on Tuesday as well. If there's any of the 5 teams that fell short in their opening games, I believe the Minnesota Wild probably have the most to feel good about. Despite losing 4-2 in Vegas, they got pucks back behind the Golden Knights defense. They went shot for shot with them during most of the night. And I just thought this was a well-played hockey game, which Vegas wound up prevailing in. But you could easily see the difference with Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Jonas Brodin in their lineup. And in fact, the Wild were 14 games over 500 during the course of the regular season with number 97 and 14 in the lineup. So that just underscores their importance. But for the Golden Knights, Tomas Hertl, a goal and an assist. And he had a key screen on Pavel Dioriev's goal in the second, which was the one that put Vegas ahead to stay. Setting up in the high slot and not allowing Philip Gustafsson to see a cross-ice pass that Dioriev wound up capitalizing on. Brett Howden also had 2 goals in this game. What an addition he has been since arriving with the Golden Knights. Just a solid player, game in, game out, and really helps along an offense, which is already pretty deep to begin with. Adin Hill had 18 saves, many of those from close in, and this is a guy that's also kind of overlooked when you talk about top goalies that are in the playoffs this year. You got to remember something. Hill's got a Stanley Cup ring going back to the title with the Golden Knights 2 years ago. For Minnesota, Steve Byam made his NHL debut. He's the first Wild player ever to make his debut during the Stanley Cup playoffs. He was on the first power play unit. He was on ice when Gustafsson was pulled at the end of the game. Really didn't look out of place, and I would say maybe the only misread that he had during the course of the evening was after Gustafsson was pulled. He had a chance to shoot through a screen to perhaps tie the game and passed up on that shot to pass over to Matt Boldy, who had 2 goals, by the way, for the Wild. And the pass didn't capitalize. Puck was stolen by William Karlsson, and Boldy had to take Karlsson down, effectively ending the game at that point. But overall, well played. And like I said, of the 5 teams that fell short over the weekend, I think the Wild have something good to feel about here, and that 5-game prediction that not only me, but Neil and Craig Button made on our playoff preview. This series feels like it may go longer than 5 games. Quickly, Monday's schedule. The Canadiens and the Washington Capitals will start their series down in D.C. at 7 o'clock on ESPN. St. Louis and Winnipeg play Game 2 at 7:30 on ESPN2. Colorado and Dallas play their second game down in Big D at 9:30 on ESPN. And then the night concludes with Edmonton and Los Angeles beginning their series, Game 1 at 10 o'clock. And Jeff Skinner makes his debut in the Stanley Cup playoffs after playing 1,075 games before actually qualifying. Other news around the NHL this past weekend. A pair of coaching firings. First in New York, Peter Laviolette let go by the Rangers after 2 seasons. The team went from President's Trophy winners in 2023-24 to out of the playoffs this year. As an organization, you can look back at the Rangers' problems going back to last summer. Neil and I have discussed numerous times. Barclay Goodrow being put on waivers, being claimed by San Jose. Jacob Trouba rumored to be on the block, and that certainly went public. And of course, Drury not really getting the players necessary during the offseason to win in playoff hockey, which is straight line, go towards the net. The Rangers remain a side-to-side, east-west team, primarily on their attack, and that was not addressed either by Drury. And over the course of the season, the Rangers looked disengaged, disinterested, dispirited, and this is where it all lands. So it'll be very interesting to see first if Drury manages to keep his job as GM, and if he does, who will be the next head coach. Over in Anaheim, this one was a little bit of a surprise, at least for me. Greg Cronin, fired by the Ducks Saturday after 2 seasons. And this is in spite of a 21-point improvement from the year before. However, the club was 30th in goals per game in both of the 2 seasons that Cronin was at the helm. The special teams were not good in either year. And Pat Verbeek cited other reasons that he was going to keep private. But in a discussion I had with Neil, I said, can things come out of exit meetings with players where it appears that there is just a universal feeling amongst the athletes that Cronin is not the right guy to lead them forward? But whatever the case may be, whoever comes into that Anaheim situation, they've got a lot of good young talent, particularly up front, with Leo Carlson, Cutter Gauthier, Mason McTavish, Troy Terry, and I'm even going to toss Trevor Zegras in there. One other note from over the weekend, the Women's World Championships, the United States with a 4-3 victory over Canada in overtime, and the Americans capture their 11th all-time gold medal in that tournament, second only to the Canadians, who have 13. As part of each of our Stanley Cup dates, we're going to have a little bit of this day in history. So we're going to take you back 74 years, April 21st, 1951, and maybe the biggest goal in the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Bill Barilko scored the Stanley Cup winning goal against the Montreal Canadiens and goalie Jerry McNeil in Game 5 of that series, in which all 5 games went to overtime. The Leafs actually forced the extra session with 32 seconds left, setting up Barilko's heroics. And by the way, the primary assist on that goal went to Howie Meeker, longtime announcer for Hockey Night in Canada. But another part that I want to bring to folks' attention here is there is video of this goal, but perhaps the best documentation is a still shot that was taken from behind Barilko, diving through the air to make his shot against McNeil. We have seen the legendary Bobby Orr goal in 1970, Mike Bossy, his backhander while suspended in midair in the 1982 finals against the Vancouver Canucks. But this black and white photo is so vivid and so spectacular in its own way, and I believe it is just one of the most underrated photos in hockey history. And if you have the opportunity to go online and take a look at this photo, please do so. But there is way more to this story. This was Barilko's last goal in the NHL. He went on a fishing trip with his dentist, Dr. HenryHudson, in August of that Cup-winning year of 51. And the plane that the two gentlemen were in disappeared in central Ontario. That wreckage was not found until June 6th of 1962. Both Barilko and Dr. Hudson were found still strapped in their seats. A lot of people like to connect these 2 years together, that the Leafs won the Cup in 51 and didn't win again until 1962. However, you got to remember that the Leafs won the Cup in 62 on April 22nd, and the wreckage was not found until June 6th. So, as they say, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But also, there's more lore to this, as a 1993 song called 50 Mission Cap by the Tragically Hip is written specifically about Barilko's death and the subsequent Leafs Stanley Cup drought. So that wraps up this day in Stanley Cup history. And that wraps up our show for today. Neil will be back with us tomorrow. So please remember to subscribe, like us, and we are putting more content up every day on X. We will speak to you again on Tuesday.